And wow, was I impressed. He toured me all around the lodge, as he would every time I came up to visit, showing me all the rooms, telling me stories, showing me pictures of the wildlife caught on camera, explaining different artifacts in the house, even giving me pie if he had it to offer. He was gracious and kind. And I've been reflecting on that because since we're among friends, I hope you don't mind me saying so, Don has the kind of personality where I wouldn't have expected him to be such a wonderful host. His own friends sometimes describe him as an adorable, ornery old man. And Don did have that hard way about him, that kind of my way or the highway attitude. And yet he was a great host. I've been there with him when other people wandered up completely unannounced, and I think they did often, and Don just dropped everything to go and entertain them. He was always so generous with his time. And in a lodge that he had worked so hard to preserve, put so much of himself in, he didn't seem to feel a possessiveness of it. He wanted people there. He hosted our church picnics there on several occasions, and I was always amazed that he didn't seem to mind that children were running amok across the lawn of the lodge playing football, or that we were digging holes with the table legs and the folding chairs. All of it seemed to be fine because, well, I think for him the purpose of the lodge was to be a lodge, was to have people there. And so even though he had worked so hard to preserve this very historic building, he loved to see it in use and to welcome people into it. And I think for that reason, I've been pondering John 14 a lot. Don, well, this is a scripture reading that we often read at funerals. And so it's not unique to today. And yet, it feels especially appropriate today. As we think of Don and the Glen Chody Lodge, the way he put himself into it so that others could enjoy it, we might think of Jesus' promise to his disciples, to tell them that he was going ahead to prepare a place for them in his Father's house that has many rooms. Some translations even suggest the true meaning is his Father's house that has many mansions, like a house with even more houses inside. In other words, a lodge so big that there's room for everyone. In this way, I think that we might remember Don with an extra special dose of fondness. To think of how he gave us a small glimpse in the way he cared for the lodge, of how our God is, our God, the great and perfect host, who has prepared a place for all of us. For Don, for you, for me, a way made possible through Jesus Christ. So today, let us remember, let us even feel some grief, but let's have hope. A hope in the promise Jesus has given us of that house with many rooms. Amen.
Glen Chody, Sarvis Dogwood, Hazel, Charity, Hazel, Chestnut Prayer, wild azaleas varicolored in their season, scent thy air. Mountain laurel, rhododendron, blooming locust, sweet gum too, stately oak and towering hemlock lead enchantment to thy ear. Maple, holly, ash, and poplar abundantly adorn your hills, majestic walnut stands, protector of thy lodge and windowsills. Spear or arrowhead, each a story of early days, the gay, the brave, when the wild game roamed thy virgin forest, hunted by some Indian brave. Shot branch here meets little Chody, blending waters onward flow, ere they reach the cascade, whispering such secrets as only the mountain streams can ever know.
with some sharing from some of Don's friends. Wayne, would you like to come up?
I'm Wayne Guller. Our wife's family, my wife's family, built a place off of Little Choggy Road, 1961. So we've been that way a while. It's a summer cabin, and that's where we've been used to for vacations. Well, I got to know Don Ezelle about 1979 or 1980. We were up here, and our youngest son had just gotten his driver's license. Well, his granddad had an old truck he left there, so he was running up and down Little Choggy Road, really enjoying that license. But bless Katie ran in the ditch. And Marilyn's dad said, well, the fellow down at the lodge, I believe he's got something to pull him out. Well, we went down there, and I think it was 3 Jeep Wagoneers. One of them with a snowplow, and one of them with a truck bed, and I don't know what all else he had. But sure enough, he came up to where we were, and not real happy about it because it was dark. But anyway, he was really nice. He pulled him out. So that's how I got to know Don. And I want to tell you what he told me about his funeral. He said, Wayne, you know, when I pass away, there'll be people at the funeral. I said, yeah, they will, Don. He said, well, 30% of them will be there to pay the respects, and 70% will be there to be darn sure I'm gone. and that's Don. That's the way he treated things. I really loved him, and we spent an awful lot of time together sitting on that front porch. And, you know, Don, all of you knew Don, he had a hearing problem. Almost didn't have any hearing. Well, mine's maybe worse than his. And we would sit on the porch and swap stories and tell things, and they were always interesting. Don could spin the best yarn ever. But I thought back about a hearing incident that happened in my family, and it relates to Don and I. My dad had cancer and was passing away. He was 83. Well, the neighbor down the road, they lived south of the town. He would come visit. Neither one of them could hear anything. Both of them loved the garden, and they talked about things. This one would be talking about one thing, and that one would be talking about another, and neither one knew what they were all saying. Well, one day my brother was there, and Ralph, his neighbor, came down and was talking to my dad about bootleggers. He was a timber buyer in North Georgia, and he was telling my dad about all of the bootleggers that were in North Georgia. And when he left, my dad looked at my brother and he says, what? He said, what in the world was he talking about rutabagas for? He ain't got any rutabagas in his garden. And I tell you, those of you who know Don, and especially me, I suspect our conversations were very much like that. But we enjoyed it. And he could spin a yarn, and when he told it, it was so real. And then the 6th or 7th time, it wasn't quite as real. But it was good. And I know we live in Florida most of the year. Used to go to Boca Grande a good bit. And Don told that story about going there when he was 16 years old. And this before they had a pedestrian bridge. It was a railroad bridge. And they would take the little boat and go for the fishing tournament. And he would relive that whole thing so well that every time I thought about Boca Grande, I didn't think about my experiences there. I thought about Don's, because it was much more vivid, the way he had put that in my memory. And speaking of hearing, Don's a unique fellow. You know that. I've been wearing hearing aids for 28 years. I've got a drawer full of them. Any of you need some. But, anyway, he's had them a long time. The only man I've ever known to have his cat eat his hearing aid. I don't know how in the world that happens, but Don, things happened to Don that didn't happen to anybody else. And then one time I was down there helping him. I forgot what we were doing, moving some limbs. He had some tree fall down. He had a little Cub Cadet tractor. And I was going to move it from on it up where the little garages were down toward the pond. And a little steep hill there, not bad. Well, I got it, went and jumped on it, started off. Well, I got going down the hill, put the brakes on. There wasn't any brakes. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do now? I can't jump off. I'm plugging to this seat too tight. So anyway, I finally got it turned around and started back up the hill. Got it stopped, and Don said, should have told you those brakes were But Chucky's sitting back there. He was pulling the bigger trailer with that same thing. The same thing happened to Chucky, is that he was on a steeper hill. And, I figured maybe Chucky's younger than I was, and he could handle more stress than me. But Don was a great friend. Spent many, many hours with him on that porch, and just miss him a lot. We went to see Don, Marilyn, Curtis, and by the way, never let Curtis forget he pulled him out of the ditch. 38 years later, he would remind him, even though they were great friends. So we went to see him there in Melbourne at Denise's place. It was a great little guest place. He was comfortable there. And the last thing he said is, I love you guys. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Thomas. I became friends with Don when the Rudolph case was going on. I was a Georgia Bureau of Investigation supervisor. We had a supervisor that had been here and been involved in the case for a number of years. He got sick while he was up here and had to basically end up taking a disability retirement and leave the Bureau, but I was his replacement. So when I came here, like all the law enforcement officers that were assigned new to the task force, one of the major stops was the lodge and visiting with Don. So you got the same spiel, no matter if you heard it before 1,000 times or not, you still got the same spiel from Don. I struck up a conversation with Don while I was there, and being new, most of our agents were younger, and they stayed in town and stayed together and socialized and had cookouts and that kind of thing. And I would spend the extra 30 minutes driving back from Andrews and driving up to the lodge and spend my time up there. He let me stay in one of the rooms. In fact, if you've been to the lodge, when you start down the hall to the rooms, the first room on the right, when I came, he would tell me, your room's open. That's where I would stay. It's hard, if you don't know Don, it's hard to understand how he told stories, and like Wayne said, how realistic he made them. One of the things that I come to learn very quick was that he could tell the story, and I'm not going to say, and I was trying to think of a word, embellish is the closest thing I can come to. But he put his own spin on the incident. And the one that I had to hear, just like the pulling out of the ditch, the one I had to hear every time I came to visit, Trayton, my youngest son, is with me today. Trayton was born while I was assigned up here 18 years ago. So when I brought the boys or my wife up here, if I was with another law enforcement officer, no matter when, I had to hear the story, and it did get embellished over the years. But right after I started staying out at the lodge, I came home to stay one night up there, and when I came in, Don always had everything in its place, of course. And when I came in and drove around the driveway, his old tractor, I think it's an International, but it was an old tractor that he used there in the garden. The tractor was sitting down in the garden on the hill, sort of sideways, with the wheels turned funny, and Don wasn't anywhere around. So, only knowing him for a few months at that time, I really got worried about him. I went in the lodge and called, and he wasn't in the lodge. And at that time, he stayed sometimes at the A-frame cabin. So I went out, looked around, went out in the workshop. I was getting worried. I didn't see him anywhere. I went up to the A-frame and I actually just ran up there. I was hollering and screaming his name. He came out of the cabin and looked at me like I was a fool. And he said, "What is it?" And I said, "I just want to make sure you're okay." He said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Your tractor was in the garden." And I said, it looked like it was out of place, and I was afraid you'd had some kind of an accident or got hurt, and I just wanted to check on you. He said, "Well, I appreciate that." He said, "You need anything else?" And I said, "Yeah, I do, as a matter of fact." He said, "What's that?" And I said, "Will you come down and help me get my car out of the ditch?" He said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I was going to back the car out from under the shelter there, and of course, again, those that know the lodge, it's got that sharp curve, so I was backing, and you had the garage blocked, the carport blocked, and I was backing around the driveway, and my left rear tire got just a little bit off on that little hill that goes down through the garden. So I just spun, so rather than spinning and making a mess and all that, that's when I left and ran up to the A-frame. So, yeah, I'll be down there in just a minute. So he come down, and I knew I was going to hear it, and I did. And he started about, "You can't drive, you can't do this, and you people in Georgia do this, and y'all do that." Hooked to me, pulled me out. Didn't hear another word about it that week. First time there was a crowd around, some of my friends were there. He said, "You know about how they are down in Georgia, and some of the guys were from Georgia, and they were sort of looking, they didn't know what was coming, and you never did know what was coming in the night." And I looked because I knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't know what it was going to be. And they said, "No, what was it?" "Oh, what are you talking about, Don?" He said, he said, "They plow their fields with a Ford Crown Victoria down there." And I said, "Oh no, here it goes." So he told the story completely with his spin of the details of what occurred. Never mentioned the part about me being scared to death and worried about him and coming to find him and all that part. But I really enjoyed my friendship. I stayed up there about a year and stayed in the lodge while I was assigned up here. And I came to know pretty quick that everything had to be Don's way. And as you know, the caretakers have sort of come and gone over the years. And after going through a few of them, I realized why. It wasn't that they did bad work always, and it wasn't that they did things wrong always, but they didn't do things the way Don told them to do it, and that's where the problems came in. And I finally started trying to help them keep their jobs a little bit. I'd call them off to the side and give them a little wisdom. And I'd say, "Look, you know, there's different ways." I said, "You know, you need to do a little work on the computer." And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, as you know, there's different ways to do different things on the computer. You can hit Alt, and you can hit F, or you can hit the key, or you can, but you get the same results." And I said, "That's what you're going to have to think about. Every time Don tells you to do something, think about the way he told you to do it." I said, "Because you can get to the same result. You may even get there quicker, better, cheaper, faster, whatever. It doesn't matter. You have to do it Don's way." And one of the ones that stayed a while, I think, took that advice. But every time we had an occasion to come up and visit, we did that after I was reassigned and went back to Georgia. And over the years, I've stayed in touch with Don and tried to come up a couple of times a year. The last few years, we got to where me and both of the boys, or me and Trey, would come up in the fall and help him pick up walnuts out there. And knowing whether or not he had a caretaker, a lot of times he didn't. We would come up and plan to stay a few days. We'd cut grass and spend time with him and listen to those same stories over and over and laugh and have a good time. But we always enjoyed our time with him. He was such a unique individual. He certainly makes a lifelong impression, and he did that on me. And I really enjoyed getting to know him and spending the time that I had